I've been cutting hair in downtown Memphis for nearly a decade now, watching life unfold through my salon's front window. The old brick building creaks with stories, just like the vintage barber chair that's been my faithful companion since day one. My regulars say I have magic fingers, but really, I just know how to listen, both to hair and to hearts. This morning started like any other, with Mrs. Peterson settling into my chair for her weekly touch-up. "Michaela, honey," she drawled, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Have you heard about that mysterious woman staying at the River Inn?" Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the armrest, a telltale sign of juicy gossip brewing. I adjusted my blonde hair, catching a glimpse of my own green eyes in the reflection. "Can't say that I have," I replied, sectioning her silver strands with practiced ease. The summer heat pressed against the windows, making the air conditioning work overtime. "Well," Mrs. Peterson continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "she's been seen walking around town at all hours, taking notes in this little black book." She paused dramatically. "And she's absolutely stunning, dear. Like something out of those fancy magazines." I hummed non-committally, focusing on the precise angle of my scissors. But truth be told, my interest was piqued. We didn't get many mysterious strangers in this part of Memphis, where everybody knew everybody's business by breakfast time. The morning wore on, filled with the usual rhythm of snips, rinses, and blow-dries. Between clients, I caught myself glancing out the window more often than usual, half expecting to spot this enigmatic newcomer. The summer humidity had turned the air thick as molasses, making even the short walk to the coffee shop across the street feel like wading through warm syrup. It wasn't until I was cleaning up for my lunch break that I noticed the flyer someone had slipped under my door. "Community First Aid Workshop," it announced in bold letters. "Be prepared to help your neighbors in need." Something about it called to me. Maybe it was the timing, maybe it was fate. I'd always meant to learn proper first aid, beyond the basic cuts and burns we covered in cosmetology school. As I locked up for my break, the wind carried the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms down the street. Memphis in summer had its own particular charm, even with the heat that made my clients' carefully styled hair curl at the edges. I pinned the flyer to my bulletin board, right next to the mirror where I couldn't ignore it. The afternoon brought in Sarah, my youngest regular, who was buzzing with more gossip about our mystery woman. "She ordered a black coffee at Pearl's," Sarah reported while I trimmed her bangs. "Just straight black coffee, can you believe it? And she has this accent, not southern but not northern either. It's like she's from everywhere and nowhere." I found myself oddly drawn to these little details, building a picture in my mind of someone who drank black coffee and wrote in notebooks and walked our streets like she was searching for something. Or maybe running from something. In a town where most people's stories were as familiar as my own reflection, the prospect of someone unknown, sent a little shiver of excitement down my spine. By closing time, I'd made up my mind about the first aid workshop. Maybe it was the string of minor burns I'd gotten from hot tools lately, or maybe it was the universe nudging me toward something I couldn't yet see. Either way, I filled out the registration form before I could talk myself out of it. As I swept up the day's clippings and shut down the salon, the setting sun painted Memphis in shades of amber and rose. Standing in my doorway, watching the last of the day's light fade, I had the strangest feeling that everything was about to change. But then again, that's what comes from spending too much time listening to Mrs. Peterson's dramatic predictions. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling as I locked up and headed home, the workshop flyer tucked safely in my purse. Little did I know, that simple piece of paper would lead me down a path I never expected, towards someone who would change everything I thought I knew about love, danger, and myself. But that's the thing about life-changing moments. They tend to sneak up on you, disguised as ordinary decisions on ordinary days in ordinary places like my little salon in downtown Memphis. The community center smelled like coffee and nervous energy when I arrived for the first aid workshop. I was running fashionably late, as usual, my salon appointments having run over. The instructor, a retired paramedic with salt and pepper hair, was already dividing people into pairs when I slipped into the back of the room. "You must be Michaela Jenkins," he announced, checking his clipboard. "Perfect timing. We need one more person for partner exercises." He gestured toward a woman standing alone near the window. "Meet your practice partner, Georgia Bailey." And there she was, the mysterious stranger everyone had been talking about. Black hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes caught the afternoon light like captured pieces of sky. She wore dark jeans and a simple white button-down, but somehow made it look like something from a fashion magazine. "Hope you don't mind playing dead for me," Georgia said with a hint of a smile, her voice carrying that undefined accent everyone had mentioned. Something about the way she said it made my cheeks warm. We started with basic CPR, which meant I had to lie down on a practice mat while Georgia knelt beside me. "Remember," the instructor called out, "check for breathing, then begin compressions." Her hands hovered above my chest, and I forced myself to keep my breathing steady. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I promise to bring you back to life." The playful glint in her eyes made my heart skip in a way that would have definitely registered on a real medical monitor. Throughout the afternoon, we took turns being patient and rescuer. Georgia's touch was confident but gentle during the recovery position demonstrations. When it was my turn to check her pulse, I couldn't help but notice how soft her skin felt beneath my fingertips. "Your hands are steady," she commented as I practiced wrapping a bandage around her wrist. "Must come from your work." "Years of wielding scissors," I replied, securing the bandage. "Though I usually create styles, not save lives." During the break, we gravitated toward the coffee station. Georgia poured herself black coffee, just like Sarah had reported. "So you're the talented stylist I keep hearing about," she said, leaning against the wall. "Your name comes up in every conversation I have in this town." "And you're the mysterious traveler everyone's been whispering about," I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. "Though they didn't mention your first aid skills." She laughed, a rich sound that made something flutter in my stomach. "Mysterious? I like that better than suspicious stranger, which is what I usually get in small towns." As we practiced splinting and sling techniques, Georgia told me bits about her travels, always careful details that somehow revealed nothing about why she was really here. But I found myself more intrigued by the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, or how she instinctively steadied me when I stumbled during a dizziness simulation. The afternoon light was fading when the workshop ended. I gathered my things, suddenly reluctant to leave. Georgia lingered nearby, fiddling with her car keys. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," I heard myself saying. "They're open late if you'd like to continue our conversation somewhere more comfortable than these practice mats." She hesitated for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Consideration, maybe concern. Then her features softened. "I'd like that," she said. "Though I should warn you, I've been told I asked too many questions." "Good thing I'm used to salon chair confessions," I replied, leading the way out into the evening air. The Memphis humidity wrapped around us like a warm blanket as we walked, our shoulders occasionally brushing. In that moment, I didn't know that this simple coffee invitation would lead to revelations that would shake both our worlds. I didn't know about the package that would arrive at my salon, or the danger that lurked behind Georgia's careful smiles. All I knew was that something about her drew me in like a moth to flame, and for the first time in years, I was ready to risk getting burned. The coffee shop's bell chimed as we entered, and Georgia's hand brushed against my lower back as she held the door. That simple touch sent electricity through my spine, and I knew, even then, that my life had just veered off its predictable path into unknown territory. But sometimes, the best stories start with a simple first aid class and a cup of coffee. Over the next few weeks, Georgia became a regular at my salon, not just for styling, though she'd sit in my chair every 10 days like clockwork, but she'd often stop by near closing time, 2 cups of black coffee in hand. The evening light would stream through the windows, catching the silver scissors on my wall and making them sparkle like stars. "Your last client today seemed chatty," she said one evening, perched on my spare styling chair. She'd rolled it next to the window, where she could watch the street while we talked. "Mrs. Henderson?" "She's writing a book about local history," I replied, sweeping up stray hair clippings. "Though she spends more time collecting gossip than actual history." Georgia laughed, that rich sound I'd grown to crave. "And what gossip did she share about me today?" "Just that you've been seen taking photos of old buildings downtown." I paused, studying her reflection in the mirror. "She thinks you're an architectural historian." "Not quite," Georgia smiled mysteriously, taking a sip of her coffee. The sunset painted her black hair with golden highlights, and something in my chest tightened at the sight. Our evening talks had become a comfortable routine. Georgia would share stories from cities she'd visited, Paris cafes, London markets, Berlin streets, but she never mentioned why she traveled so much, or what brought her to Memphis. I found myself watching her hands as she talked, the way they moved through the air, painting pictures of distant places. One particularly humid evening, we decided to walk down to the river after I closed up. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias and approaching rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance as we strolled along the waterfront. "I never planned to stay in Memphis this long," Georgia admitted, her shoulder brushing against mine as we walked. "Something about this place, or someone, keeps making me postpone my departure." My heart skipped at her words, but before I could respond, the sky opened up. We ran for cover under a nearby pavilion, laughing as the rain poured down around us. Georgia's hand found mine in our dash for shelter, and she didn't let go once we were safe. Her fingers were warm against mine, slightly calloused in a way I hadn't expected. We stood there, watching the rain, our hands linked in comfortable silence. The air between us felt charged, like the storm had brought down some invisible barrier. "Your hands are always so warm," she murmured, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. The simple touch sent shivers up my arm. "Occupational hazard," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "All that time with hot styling tools." She turned to face me, her blue eyes intense in the stormy light. A drop of rain fell from her hair onto her cheek, and without thinking, I reached up to brush it away. Her skin was soft under my fingertips, and I felt her breath catch. The moment stretched between us, full of possibility. Thunder crashed overhead, but neither of us moved. George's free hand came up to cover mine where it rested against her cheek. "Michaela," she whispered, and my name had never sounded like that before, like a prayer and a question all at once. The kiss, when it came, was as gentle as summer rain. Her lips were soft against mine, tasting of coffee and promises. The world narrowed to the points where we connected. Our linked hands, our shared breath, the warmth of her body so close to mine. When we finally pulled apart, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. Georgia's eyes were bright with emotion, but there was something else there too, a shadow of worry or fear that I couldn't quite understand. "We should get you home," she said softly, squeezing my hand, "before the next wave of the storm hits." As we walked back through the dampened streets, our fingers still intertwined, I couldn't shake the feeling that Georgia was holding something back, that behind her travel stories and mysterious smiles lay secrets that could change everything. But in that moment, with the taste of her kiss still on my lips and her hand warm in mine, I didn't care about secrets or mysteries. I just knew that whatever storm was coming, I wanted to weather it with her. Little did I know then that the real storm hadn't even begun, and that kiss in the rain would be just the beginning of a story far more complex than I could have imagined. But sometimes the best love stories start with a little thunder, a lot of rain, and hands that fit together perfectly in the dark. I couldn't focus at work the next day. My mind kept drifting back to that kiss in the rain, to the way Georgia's hand had felt in mine. Even my regular clients noticed something was different. "Your head's in the clouds today, Michaela," Mrs. Peterson said as I trimmed her ends. "Could it have something to do with that mysterious friend of yours?" I caught myself smiling in the mirror, remembering the taste of coffee on Georgia's lips. "Just thinking about some changes in my life," I answered diplomatically, but my cheeks flushed pink. The salon felt different now, charged with possibility every time the bell above the door chimed. Each time, my heart would leap, hoping to see Georgia's reflection in the mirror. When she finally appeared late that afternoon, the setting sun haloed her black hair like a crown. "Dinner?" she asked simply, leaning against my station. "I'm cooking at my place tonight." The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with promise. I nodded, trying to ignore the knowing looks from my last client of the day. Georgia's rental apartment was small but elegant, with large windows overlooking the river. Books and notebooks were scattered everywhere, along with a professional camera I hadn't known she owned. The kitchen smelled of garlic and herbs, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. "Wine?" she offered, pouring without waiting for my answer. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed me the glass, and electricity sparked between us. We talked while she cooked, moving around each other in the small kitchen like we'd done it 100 times before. She told me about the summer she spent in Tuscany, learning to cook from an old woman who spoke no English. I shared stories about my first disasters as a stylist, making her laugh with tales of accidental green hair and traumatized prom queens. But there was something else simmering beneath our casual conversation. Every accidental touch, every shared glance in the candlelight, built a tension that made it hard to breathe. After dinner, we moved to her small balcony. The Memphis night was warm and heavy with jasmine from the climbing vines. Georgia stood behind me as we looked out over the city lights, her hands resting lightly on my hips. "I'm not good at staying in one place," she whispered against my hair. "I'm not good at letting people get close." I turned in her arms, meeting those intense blue eyes. "I'm not asking you to change who you are." Her kiss was different this time, urgent, hungry, full of unspoken words. We made love slowly, exploring each other with gentle hands and whispered questions. The city lights painted patterns on her skin, and I traced them with my fingertips, memorizing every curve and shadow. Later, tangled in her sheets, Georgia told me more about her travels. But I noticed what she didn't say, why she chose each destination, what she was looking for or running from. Her stories were like beautiful photographs that showed everything except what was just outside the frame. "Sometimes I think you're still a mystery," I said, tracing patterns on her shoulder. She caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. "Maybe that's for the best," she replied, but something in her voice made me wonder. I fell asleep to the sound of distant river barges and Georgia's steady breathing. In my dreams, I chased her through endless city streets, always one step behind, never quite catching up. When I woke before dawn, she was sitting by the window, silhouetted against the lightening sky. She was writing in one of her notebooks, her face serious in the gray light. For a moment, she looked like a stranger again, and I felt a chill despite the warm air. "Come back to bed," I called softly, and she turned, her smile chasing away my unease. But as she slipped back under the covers, pulling me close, I couldn't shake the feeling that this happiness was fragile. That Georgia's mysteries might be deeper and darker than I imagined. That loving her might be like trying to hold on to smoke, beautiful but impossible to grasp. Still, as she kissed me good morning, I knew it was too late for caution. My heart had already decided that Georgia Bailey, with all her secrets and shadows, was worth any risk. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was setting up the salon for the day. Brown paper, carefully wrapped, about the size of a shoebox. No return address, just "for Georgia Bailey," written in precise handwriting, care of my salon address. I placed it on my station, next to the register where I couldn't miss it. Georgia hadn't mentioned expecting any deliveries, but then again there was so much she hadn't mentioned. The package sat there all morning, drawing my eyes between clients like a magnet. Around noon the bell chimed and Georgia walked in, her face lighting up when she saw me. But her expression froze when she spotted the package. All the color drained from her face. "When did this arrive?" Her voice was tight, controlled in a way I'd never heard before. "This morning." "Georgia, what's wrong?" I reached for her hand, but she was already moving, snatching up the package and checking every angle of it. "Clear your afternoon appointments," she said, her blue eyes intense. "Please, Michaela, I need your help." I'd never seen her like this, the easy grace replaced by tightly wound tension. I called my remaining clients, rescheduling with apologies and vague excuses about a family emergency. Georgia waited until we were alone, blinds drawn, door locked. She opened the package with careful, deliberate movements. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a USB drive, a stack of photographs, and a handwritten note. The photos spilled across my styling station. They showed men in expensive suits, handshakes in dark corners, documents changing hands, and surveillance photos of Georgia herself, talking to people I didn't recognize. "I'm an investigative journalist," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been tracking a corruption scandal involving several major corporate executives and local government officials." My stomach dropped as pieces started falling into place. The careful stories, the notebook, the way she watched everything. "Here in Memphis?" She nodded, spreading out the photos. "It started in Chicago, but the trail led here. These people, they're powerful, dangerous. They've been laundering money through construction projects, bribing officials. The architectural photos Mrs. Henderson saw you taking. Evidence of shell companies, fake renovation projects." Georgia ran a hand through her hair. "I thought I was being careful, but they must have traced me here." I picked up one of the photos, Georgia talking to an elderly man outside a coffee shop. "Who sent these?" "Someone on the inside, a whistleblower." She held up the note. "They're warning me that I've been compromised. The people I'm investigating, they know where I am now." My hand found hers across the scattered evidence. "You need to go to the police." "The police?" She laughed bitterly. "Some of them are involved. That's why my source sent this here, not to my apartment. They're watching me." Fear crept up my spine as I looked at the photos again. Are they watching me too? Georgia's face softened and she pulled me close. I'm so sorry, Michaela. I never meant to drag you into this. I should have stayed away, should have never let myself. Don't, I interrupted, pressing my fingers to her lips. Don't you dare apologize for what's between us. She kissed my fingertips, then stepped back, gathering the evidence with quick, efficient movements. I need to hide these somewhere safe. Not at my apartment, not here. My house, I said without hesitation. They don't know about it, right? Georgia paused, considering. It would be safer if you weren't involved at all. I'm already involved. I took her hand, squeezing it firmly. And I'm not letting you face this alone. For a moment she looked like she might argue. Then her shoulders slumped slightly and she pulled me into a fierce kiss. What did I do to deserve you? You ordered black coffee and played dead convincingly, I said, trying to lighten the mood. But my heart was racing with equal parts fear and determination. We repackaged everything carefully and I slipped it into my regular grocery bag. Just a normal day, nothing suspicious here. But as we locked up the salon, I noticed a dark car parked across the street that I'd never seen before. Georgia saw it too. Her hand tightened on mine as we walked to my car. Act normal, she whispered, but be careful. From now on, be very careful. As we drove to my house, I caught glimpses of the car in my rearview mirror, always several vehicles back. And I realized that my quiet life in Memphis had just become part of something much bigger and much more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But looking at Georgia's profile in the fading light, I knew one thing for certain: whatever storm was coming, we would weather it together. My house became our sanctuary over the next few days. We converted my spare bedroom into a makeshift investigation center, spreading the evidence across an old card table. Georgia worked late into the night, connecting threads between photos and documents, her face illuminated by her laptop screen. I'd never seen my home look so alive. Papers covered every surface, and Georgia's coffee cups multiplied like rabbits. But more than that, her presence filled the spaces I hadn't known were empty. Even with the danger lurking outside, something about it felt right. These construction permits don't match the actual buildings, Georgia muttered one evening, surrounded by city planning documents. They're hiding millions in these fake renovation projects. I was supposed to be reviewing bank statements, but I found myself watching her instead. The way she bit her lip when concentrating, how her black hair fell forward when she leaned over her notes. Even now, with dark circles under her eyes and worry lines creasing her forehead, she was beautiful. You're staring, she said without looking up. Can you blame me? I moved behind her chair, massaging her tense shoulders. She leaned back into my touch with a soft sigh. We should be more careful, she said, but her hands reached up to cover mine. The dark car was outside the salon again today. I'd noticed it too, but didn't want to add to her worries. Instead, I bent down and kissed her neck, feeling her pulse quicken under my lips. Let them watch the salon. We're safe here. She turned in her chair, pulling me down into her lap. Her kiss was desperate, hungry, like she was trying to forget everything else. Papers scattered as she lifted me onto the table, evidence forgotten in favor of more urgent matters. We made love right there, surrounded by the proof of corruption and danger. Georgia's hands were gentle despite her urgency, and when she whispered my name, it sounded like a prayer for salvation. Later, curled together on my couch, she traced patterns on my skin. I should leave, she said softly. Draw them away from you, from Memphis. No. I sat up, meeting her eyes in the dim light. We're in this together now. Michaela, she touched my cheek. These people, they destroy lives. They've done it before. Then we'll stop them. I caught her hand, pressing it against my heart. Together. A noise outside made us both freeze. Headlights swept across the windows, then disappeared. Georgia was on her feet instantly, peering through the curtains. Black sedan, she whispered. They're getting bolder. We spent the night in darkness, watching and waiting. Georgia insisted on taking first watch, but eventually exhaustion won out. She fell asleep with her head in my lap, one hand still clutching her phone. I stayed awake, running my fingers through her hair, watching shadows move across the walls. The fear was there, a constant companion now, but something else burned brighter: determination. No one was going to drive Georgia away, not when I'd finally found her. Dawn brought a semblance of normalcy. Georgia kissed me goodbye before heading to her apartment to change clothes, promising to meet me at the salon later. But as I watched her drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The evidence was safely hidden in my attic, tucked behind old Christmas decorations. But the weight of those secrets pressed down on us both. Every customer could be watching. Every casual conversation could be fishing for information. Still, when Georgia appeared at the salon that afternoon, her smile chased away my fears. She was worth it, worth the risk, worth the fear, worth everything. And watching her blue eyes light up when she saw me, I knew she felt the same. "Coffee?" she asked, holding out a cup. "Always," I replied, taking it from her. Our fingers brushed, and that simple touch held more meaning than ever before. We were in this together now, for better or worse. And somehow, between the danger and the secrets and the stolen moments of passion, we'd found something real, something worth fighting for. The black car might be watching, but they couldn't see what mattered. 2 hearts beating in sync, 2 lives intertwined, and a love strong enough to face whatever came next. The tail car became our constant shadow over the next week. Sometimes it was the black sedan, sometimes a dark SUV, but always there, watching. I started taking different routes home each night, checking my rearview mirror obsessively. Georgia grew more restless with each passing day. I'd catch her staring out the salon windows, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. The circles under her eyes darkened, and her smiles became rarer. "They're closing in," she said one evening, pacing my living room. "They've started following my sources. 2 of them won't talk to me anymore." I watched her from the couch, my heart aching. "Maybe we should take what we have to the FBI. It's not enough." She ran her fingers through her black hair, making it wild. "We need concrete proof of the money trail. Without that, it's just speculation and circumstantial evidence." The distance between us had been growing, subtle but unmistakable. Georgia spent more time working and less time in my arms. Even when we were together, part of her seemed far away, lost in the web of corruption she was trying to unravel. "I saw Thompson today," she continued, naming one of the officials she was investigating. "He was outside the coffee shop across from your salon, just standing there, watching." My stomach clenched. Thompson was high up in the city's development office, one of the key players in Georgia's investigation. "He knows who I am?" "They all do by now." Georgia stopped pacing, her face haunted. "Michaela, I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger just by being close to you." "Don't." I stood up, crossing to her. "Don't you dare try to push me away. You don't understand." Her voice cracked. "These people, they don't just threaten. They act. They destroy lives, businesses, families. Your salon, your clients, your whole life here." I silenced her with a kiss, pouring all my fear and love and determination into it. For a moment, she melted against me, her hands gripping my waist like I was her anchor in a storm. Then she pulled away, and I saw tears in her blue eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "That's why I have to leave." "No." I held her face between my hands. "Love is why you have to stay. We're stronger together." "Michaela." She pressed her forehead to mine. "I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. But I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen to me." I kissed her again softly. "We'll figure this out." A car door slammed outside, and we both jumped. Georgia was at the window in an instant, cursing under her breath. 2 of them now. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. I joined her at the window. 2 dark vehicles were parked across the street, their occupants barely visible in the gathering dusk. As we watched, one of them lit a cigarette, its ember glowing like a warning. Georgia's hand found mine, squeezing tight. I should never have stayed in Memphis this long. Should never have let myself fall in love. "Stop it." I turned her to face me. "Loving me is not your mistake, and running away won't protect either of us now." She studied my face in the dim light, like she was memorizing every detail. Then she kissed me with a passion that took my breath away, backing me against the wall. Her hands tangled in my hair, and I could taste her desperation. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I saw the decision in her eyes. "Promise me," I said quickly. "Promise you won't disappear." "I promise," she whispered against my lips. But something in her voice made my heart ache. That night, we made love like it was the last time, every touch charged with emotion we couldn't put into words. Georgia mapped my body with her hands and mouth, and I held her close, trying to believe her promise. But when I woke in the pre-dawn darkness, the bed beside me was cold. On my nightstand was a note in Georgia's precise handwriting: "Forgive me. I love you too much to destroy your life too." I'd never known a heart could literally ache until that moment. But as I crumpled the note in my fist, something else rose through the pain: determination. If Georgia thought she could protect me by leaving, she was wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Georgia might have left, but she couldn't take her evidence with her. I spent that first morning alone, studying every document, every photo, every note she'd compiled. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, we just needed to make them fit. My salon became my cover and my headquarters. I kept the evidence locked in my office, reviewing it between clients. Mrs. Peterson's weekly appointment became my chance to drop careful questions about local development projects. Every bit of gossip could be a potential lead. "Did you hear about that new shopping complex?" she asked one morning while I trimmed her silver hair. "The one they're building where the old factory used to be?" I remembered seeing photos of that site in Georgia's files. "Tell me more." "Well, they say it's going to be quite grand. Though, isn't it strange they're already asking for more funding? Construction barely started." My scissors paused mid-snip. This was exactly the kind of detail Georgia had been tracking: inflated budgets, mysterious additional funding requests. I made a note as soon as Mrs. Peterson left. The watching cars were still there, but they didn't know what I knew, that Georgia had taught me well. I started taking photos with my phone, documenting their patterns. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the men inside: expensive suits, Bluetooth earpieces, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. One evening after closing the salon, I decided to set a trap. I left the lights on and my car in its usual spot, but slipped out the back door. Moving through the shadows, I circled around behind the watcher's car. They were so focused on the salon's front door, they didn't notice me approaching from behind. Their windows were cracked, and I could hear their conversation. "She's still here every day," one man said. "Bailey must have left her some information. Thompson wants us to search the place." My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay still, listening. They were planning to break in that weekend, when the salon would be closed for renovations, a detail I'd only announced yesterday. I waited until they drove away before hurrying home. My hands shook as I pulled out Georgia's files, but my mind was clear. We needed to move fast. The next morning, I called Sarah, my youngest employee. "Remember that styling workshop you wanted to attend? The one in Nashville this weekend? Take it. In fact, take the whole week." She was delighted, of course. I spent the day moving the most damaging evidence to a new hiding place. A hidden compartment in my antique barber chair, the one piece of furniture that never left the salon. The rest of the evidence, I prepared for discovery. Receipts that looked suspicious but proved nothing. Photos that suggested impropriety but couldn't confirm it, enough to make them think they'd found what they were looking for. I also made copies of everything, securing them in 3 different locations. If something happened to me, the evidence wouldn't die with me. The night before the planned break-in, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stay safe. I love you. Georgia." My heart clenched, but I deleted the message immediately. No traces. That night, I hardly slept. Instead, I sat in my living room, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. The dark cars came and went, their occupants never suspecting that their target was 3 steps ahead of them. Morning came, and I drove to the salon as usual. The renovation signs were up, warning clients we'd be closed for the weekend. I made a show of carrying out some styling equipment, then drove away. But I didn't go far. From a careful vantage point, I watched and waited. When the men finally moved in, I documented everything with my phone's camera, evidence of their evidence tampering. Another piece in our growing arsenal. They left 2 hours later, looking satisfied. They thought they'd won, thought they'd found Georgia's secrets, but the real evidence was safe and growing stronger every day. That night, I sent a text to the number Georgia had used. "I'm fighting for us. Don't give up." The response came hours later. "Be careful. Please." I smiled in the darkness. Georgia had taught me more than she realized, about investigation, about courage, about fighting for what matters. Now it was my turn to show her what I'd learned. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 weeks after Georgia's departure, the story broke. It started small, a local news website running a piece about irregularities in city development contracts. By noon, larger outlets had picked it up. By evening, it was running on national news. Breaking news: major corruption scandal rocks Memphis development office scrolled across the TV screen in my salon. My clients sat transfixed as reporters detailed the scheme. Millions in fraudulent contracts, kickbacks, money laundering through fake renovation projects. Isn't this terrible? Mrs. Peterson shook her head, watching from under the dryer. And right here in our city. I kept my face neutral as I worked, but my heart was racing. I recognized the documents they were showing, copies of ones hidden in my barber chair. Georgia must have had backup plans I didn't know about. The door chimed and Thompson walked in, my first glimpse of him since the story broke. His expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat on his forehead. "Miss Jenkins," he tried to smile. "Might we have a word in private?" "I'm with clients," I replied calmly, though my scissors trembled slightly. "And my appointment book is full today." His face hardened. "I insist." "Everything okay, Michaela?" Mrs. Peterson called from her chair, and other clients looked up. Thompson glanced around, realizing he had an audience. "Another time, perhaps," he said smoothly, but his eyes promised trouble. When he left, I texted the latest unknown number I had for Georgia. "It's starting." The response came quickly: "Watch the news at 6. That evening, Georgia appeared on a national news program. She looked tired but determined, her black hair pulled back severely, those blue eyes fierce as she laid out the evidence. She didn't mention Memphis specifically, or me, but I felt her words in my soul. "This corruption isn't limited to one city," she said. "It's a network spanning multiple states. Today's revelations are just the beginning." The following days were chaos. Thompson resigned, for personal reasons. Other officials followed. The FBI arrived, setting up a command center downtown. My salon became surprisingly busy. Everyone wanted to share theories and gossip while getting their hair done. I kept working, kept listening, kept gathering information. The watching cars disappeared, replaced by occasional FBI agents who were much worse at surveillance. I pretended not to notice them. Late one night, my phone buzzed. "I miss you." "Come home," I texted back. "Not yet. Stay strong." The media circus grew. More cities, more officials implicated. Georgia appeared on more shows, became the face of the investigation. I watched her on my screen, remembering how she felt in my arms, how her voice sounded when she wasn't being a crusading journalist. Thompson made one last attempt at intimidation. He cornered me outside the salon one evening, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his face haggard. "You don't know what you've done," he snarled. "You and that damn reporter." I stood my ground. "I know exactly what I've done." He stepped closer, threatening. "You think you're safe now? You think this is over?" "I think," I said clearly, "that the FBI agents watching us right now would love an excuse to arrest you." He spun around, finally noticing the surveillance team. When he turned back, his face was murderous, but he walked away. That night, I got another text. "Saw what happened. You were amazing." "Learned from the best," I replied. "When are you coming back?" "Soon." One more piece to put in place. I fell asleep with my phone in my hand, dreaming of Georgia's return. The scandal was still unfolding, but I could feel the tide turning. Justice was coming, slow but sure as sunrise. And somewhere out there, Georgia was fighting for truth, for justice, and maybe, just maybe, for her way back to me. The scandal dominated national headlines for weeks. As more officials were arrested and more evidence came to light, the city started to feel different, like a fresh breeze had blown through, clearing away years of corruption and secrets. My salon became an unexpected hub of community support. People came not just for haircuts, but to share their stories of how the corruption had affected their neighborhoods, their businesses, their lives. Each tale confirmed what Georgia and I had fought to expose. "You know what?" Mrs. Peterson said during her regular appointment. "I always thought something wasn't right with those construction projects. The numbers never made sense. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what's been in front of us all along," I replied, thinking of Georgia's first observations about the city's development patterns. The FBI wrapped up their main investigation, leading to 37 arrests across 3 states. Thompson and his associates faced federal charges. The evidence was overwhelming, Bank records, contracts, surveillance footage, all pointing to years of systematic corruption. Local news crews showed up at my salon, wanting interviews about Georgia. "You two were close," one reporter pressed. "Did you know what she was investigating?" "Georgia Bailey is a talented journalist who exposed the truth," I said carefully. "That's all that matters." But privately, I missed her more each day. Our text exchanges had become less frequent as the case consumed her time. The last message I'd received simply said, "Almost done, trust me." The city began to heal. A new development oversight committee was formed, with actual community representatives. Small business owners who'd been squeezed out by corrupt deals were invited back to the table. Memphis felt alive with possibility. One evening, as I was closing up the salon, Mrs. Henderson rushed in, clutching her phone. "Turn on the news, dear, right now." I flipped on the TV just in time to see Georgia at a press conference in Washington, D.C. She looked powerful and confident as she detailed the full scope of the investigation. But what caught my attention was her closing statement. "This case began because one person in Memphis was brave enough to stand with me," she said, looking directly into the camera. "They risked everything to protect their community and support the truth. They taught me that sometimes, finding home means finding someone willing to fight alongside you." My heart stopped, then started again, racing. The bell above the door chimed. I turned, and there she was, Georgia Bailey in the flesh, looking travel-worn but beautiful. Her blue eyes found mine across the salon. "I saw your press conference," I managed to say. "Did you get my message?" She stepped closer. "About finding home?" "About finding you." She reached for my hand. "I'm done running, Michaela, if you'll still have me." Instead of answering, I pulled her close and kissed her. Behind us, Mrs. Henderson quietly slipped out, the bell chiming again softly. When we finally parted, Georgia rested her forehead against mine. "The whole time I was away, fighting this fight, you were my anchor, my true north, my home. No more disappearing," I whispered. "No more secrets," she promised. "Just us, building something real." Outside, Memphis was changing, growing, healing. Inside, in the warm light of my salon, Georgia and I held each other, knowing we'd helped make that change possible. Sometimes love means fighting for what's right. Sometimes it means coming home. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it means both. Spring arrived in Memphis, bringing new beginnings. The salon had undergone its own transformation. I'd expanded into the vacant space next door, creating a bright, airy office where Georgia could work on her investigative stories between my appointments. "What do you think?" I asked, showing her the finished space. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the exposed brick walls and her new desk. "It's perfect," Georgia smiled, pulling me close. "Just like everything else about this place." The scandal had changed Memphis, but it had changed us too. Georgia's reporting had earned her national recognition, but she'd chosen to stay, establishing herself as a respected local investigative journalist. Her stories now focused on community development and positive changes in the city. We'd moved in together, merging our lives as naturally as breathing. My house became our home, filled with her books and cameras alongside my styling tools. Every morning, I'd wake to find her already up, writing at the kitchen table, black hair messy from sleep. "The community center called," she told me one morning. "They want us to teach a joint class, first aid and emergency preparedness." I laughed, remembering our first meeting. "Should we make the students practice dying dramatically?" "It worked for me," she grinned, pulling me down for a kiss that tasted of coffee and promise. The salon thrived, becoming known as a place where truth and beauty went hand in hand. My clients loved having a renowned journalist working next door, though Georgia insisted she was just doing her job. "You two are good for each other," Mrs. Peterson observed during her weekly appointment, "and good for Memphis." She was right. Together, we'd found something rare, a partnership that made both of us stronger, better versions of ourselves. Georgia's determination had given me courage to stand up for what's right. My stability had given her a reason to stop running. One evening, as we walked along the riverfront where we'd shared our first kiss, Georgia stopped suddenly. "Do you ever regret it, getting involved in all this?" I turned to face her, taking in those blue eyes that still made my heart skip. "Never. Not for a single moment. Even with all the danger, the uncertainty? The only uncertainty that scared me was losing you," I said honestly. Everything else we could handle together. She pulled me close, and we stood watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold. The air was thick with jasmine and possibility. "I used to think home was something you ran from," Georgia murmured against my hair. "You taught me it's something you build." Back in the salon, we'd pinned a photo on the wall, the two of us at the reopening celebration, Georgia's arm around my waist, both of us laughing. Beside it hung her first award for investigative journalism and my certificate for Business of the Year. Small victories, maybe, in the grand scheme of things, but they were ours, earned together. Just like this life we'd built, this love we'd fought for, this home we'd created. Memphis had changed, and so had we. But some things remained constant. The river's flow, the summer heat, and two women who'd found each other in a first aid class and decided to face whatever came next, side by side. Georgia shut down her laptop and stood, stretching. "Ready to head home?" I looked around the salon, my dream made real then at her, my love made real, and smiled. "I am home." She took my hand, our fingers intertwining naturally, perfectly, like they had since that first rainy evening. Together we walked out into the Memphis twilight, towards whatever adventure waited next. Some stories end with dramatic revelations, others with grand gestures. But the best ones, I think, end like this. With quiet joy, with hands held tight, with love that feels as natural as breathing. With home.